It is very important to have an interview with you after especially the Madrid summit, because there was some very interesting points for our country as well. So let's start our interview, and the first question will be regarding your interview on the public broadcaster on 6th of May. Where you said that you understand well the representatives of the Georgian society and authorities who, quote, are worried about the risks, what will happen in Russia if Russia opens the second front line, as they say, but I believe that if Russia chooses this path, it will be a strategic mistake. I can't believe they are going to do it now. Therefore, our assessment is, of course, there are risks. Risks are everywhere, but we are ready to provide the greatest assistance to Georgia if necessary. This was the quote from the interview you gave to the public broadcaster on the 6th of May. And first of all, I would like to ask you, after 2 months of this interview, what is your approach? Is your approach the same regarding the risks?
Yeah, thank you very much. Basically, our assessment, it is the same. We see Russia having blatantly violating the international law. It's the sole responsible for the war that is going on and the humanitarian catastrophe that is happening in Ukraine. So we see them actually as the sole ones to being responsible for everything that is happening, and the food security crisis, the energy security crisis. So with regard to the risk associated with Georgia, as I said 2 months ago, we believe that there is a risk of interference from Russia, which is quite clear in terms of disinformation, hybrid or cyberspace. But we don't believe there is an imminent risk of enlarging the war to Georgia. I said it 2 months ago, and I still consider that that's not the case, because we believe that there are some risk of interference, but not greater than that. We have decided to increase our support to Georgia in many ways, and that was part actually of the decisions that we took in Madrid in the summit, and the tailored measures support that we approved at the highest level with the heads of state and government in Madrid.
You said that if necessary, we are ready to provide the greatest assistance to Georgia. We are working on new measures of cooperation which include more cooperation than we have now. What are these new measures of cooperation specifically?
NATO has been actually very diligent in responding to the war of Russia in Ukraine. We've done that through different means. Probably the two most recognized responses have been the support we have provided to Ukraine through what we call the comprehensive assistance package, but also the training that we have provided to the Ukrainian forces. We have also responded by what I believe is one of the most fundamental tasks that NATO has ever implemented, which is to prevent that a local war becomes a global war. And there is a third leg of what we've done, and is actually to try to help and support what we call partners at risk of interference from Russia, as I said before. And one of them is Georgia. The other two would be Bosnia and Herzegovina and Moldova. So we have approved, as you know, a set of tailored measures. Those have different specific measures. Some of them are actually included, but will be reinforced in the substantial NATO-Georgia package that we approved some time ago. But there are a few novelties in those new measures in order to increase the interoperability, the efficiency of the Georgian armed forces, but also the transition between old Soviet weaponry to modern West weaponry. At the same time, we have created, for instance, a program to support for CBRN attacks, chemical and biological. Also try to increase your participation in exercises. As you know, we already hold in March a NATO-Georgia exercise, and as I always say, is something that you should be proud of. We are very proud of being able to carry on an exercise with Georgian armed forces. That means a lot in terms of how efficient and professional your armed forces are, and only a bunch of partners can say that. And finally, in trying to increase the synergies of the work we do on the ground with the European Union and Georgia. So those will be probably the fundamental pieces of these new tailored measures we have.
How the NATO strategy has been changed because of the war in Ukraine?
Well, no doubt NATO, I mean, in my opinion, the Russia's war in Ukraine is a tectonic change to international relations and to European security architecture. In that sense, NATO being the most important and probably the most successful political military organization, we had, of course, to adapt to it. And since February 24th, everything has changed for us in many aspects. And I'm sure we'll have the opportunity in this interview to talk about other things, like, for instance, the accession of Finland and Sweden. But in terms of our military strategy, of course, we have, as I said, we have implemented probably the greatest increase in our collective defense. We have approved a new force model that allows us to have more forces and increase the readiness of those. We used to have the ability to move in a short period of time up to 40,000 troops. Now we have the ability to move up to 300,000 troops. We have decided to pre-position equipment in the Eastern Front, so to be able to react in a quicker way. At the same time, and the strategic concept takes care of all those aspects, and as I said before, by supporting Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and in this case Georgia, we have decided to support not only partners at risk, but also in regions that we consider of critical importance. And the Black Sea is one of them. It doesn't mean that it wasn't before a region of strategic importance. It was before, long before. We actually approved a substantial package for the Black Sea, I think it was 3 years ago. But in this occasion, we have recognized that this has an enormous importance for us in many domains, air domain, maritime domain specifically. And in that sense, our cooperation with Georgia as a very valued partner in the Black Sea is a fundamental one.
After the start of the war in Ukraine, the borders between NATO and Russia has been even more increased, and as a result of the membership of the Sweden and the Finland, what becomes the basis of the decision? The readiness of the respective country, the regional geopolitical context, or the Russian factor? And of course, we are interested in response in regard of the Georgia and the Georgian possibilities becoming the NATO member.
So in the case of Finland and Sweden, what triggered everything, it was their own will to become partners. So I will stick with that, with their own readiness and will to become partners. Of course, among the many factors that triggered that willingness, it is the geopolitical situation, and it is the war in Ukraine. They were ready, yes. They've been very, very close partners for long, with what we call modalities for strengthened interaction that only Finland and Sweden have, which allows them for years already to cooperate and operationalize their forces in a different way. And in that sense, they were absolutely ready, and that is why their request was granted quite quickly. In terms of Georgia, I think that the message is quite clear. The door is open, and you just need to get ready for entering through that door whenever you have the level of readiness that is requested. As you know, there is a political decision always to be taken, and in the case of Finland and Sweden, the political decision was taken. But before to take the decision, it is fundamental to be ready. And in order to be ready, I've stressed that in many occasions, Georgia needs to continue to do many of the things you do in terms of practical cooperation, the military requirements, but you also need to increase and regain the level of fulfillment of the reforms we have requested. And the international community, not just NATO, but also the European Union, or the Venice Commission, or the ODIHR have identified as fundamental for Georgia to get closer to its Euro-Atlantic aspirations.
Thank you for a very diplomatic answer, and usually we respect our partners, and the Georgian citizens are very into much and waiting for this opportunity to enter the open door to NATO, and hope we will manage it to do soon. While talking about the NATO, we often use the example of how country with divided territories became the NATO member, and we called it a myth that it's occupied territories that stand in the way of Georgia NATO membership. But a few days ago, the Prime Minister of Georgia has repeated this narrative. To clarify once again, under the conditions of the occupation, to what extent does Georgia have NATO perspective, or what impact NATO membership can have on the country's territorial integrity?
Well, I think I've been quite clear in the past on this particular question. We have always supported since 2008, since we took the Bucharest decisions, the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Georgia. We have never said that we support Georgia to become a partner, whatever it takes, and who cares about the territorial integrity. We've been always very clear about that fact, and for us that means Georgia within its international recognized border, which means, of course, with Abkhazia and South Ossetia. So I won't enter into something that we haven't supported in the past. I know there's been some voices saying that maybe it would be easier for Georgia to become a partner to whatever organization if you didn't have that territorial controversy. But in our opinion, is Georgia, as it is recognized today, that should enter the international organizations, both the European Union and NATO. And of course, we have supported and we continue to support very much the very constructive engagement that you have in conflict resolution, the peaceful means that you have applied to trying to engage with the populations, the Georgian populations in Abkhazia and in South Ossetia. We have also supported your efforts in the Geneva international discussions. We of course don't like the way that the Russians are behaving in those discussions, and we are of course concerned about the paralysis that affects to those discussions, but that's the way it is. But we would continue to support Georgia in your efforts. Myself, every time that I go to your country or that I engage with your high officials, I support very much both aspects of your attitude towards conflict resolution and to the Geneva international discussions. But at the same time, what you should do is to continue to get ready when the time comes. And I don't think you should speculate, that is my personal opinion, with what Georgia should do. You should work as a nation and try to become a member of this organization as the nation that we know and we want from you.
Given that the Russian disinformation is really increasing and affecting people's mind, and the far-right groups are still becoming more powerful in country, What is the NATO communication strategy to face these challenges?
Well, it is a good question. We are, of course, very concerned about the disinformation. The level of hybrid attacks using disinformation has increased in the last years, and in particular since February 24th. We know that the Russians are using every option to try to disinform, and it is the case in Georgia, not only since the summit or before the summit, but also regarding the decisions taken by the European Commission on Georgian European path. So for us, there are a couple of things that are fundamental here. First, free media. The role that free media plays is fundamental, and that is why we try to work with our NATO liaison office in Tbilisi with your media outlets. I try to engage with you as much as I can. I think it's fundamental that we try to convey the proper messages. That is why usually I try to be very clear on my responses on the things that we believe Georgia is doing excellently, and the things that on the other side we believe Georgia could do in a better way. We don't want, and I don't want personally to be misinterpreted or misused. When I say something that I believe Georgia could do better, doesn't mean that you're not doing other things in an excellent way, and that you are continue to be a very valued partner. And at the end, I believe that the public opinion is able to recognize where are the main problems. Of course, disinformation doesn't help sometimes, affects every government here and there. Not only governments in the Caucasus, but governments in Europe are facing great amounts of pressure because of disinformation. But at the same time, I believe there is a clear truth that is raising everywhere, which is that Russia is the one to blame for everything that is happening. And one of the actual conclusions of this process, which actually gives us a clear sense on how effective your media outlets are, is that NATO continues to get a very strong support. If you were actually influenced very much by this disinformation, both you would have probably wrong ideas on what is going on in Ukraine, and you wouldn't be supporting at a rate of almost an 80% NATO. So I think that's the best proof that we are working in a proper way. But that doesn't mean that we're not concerned. We are, of course, concerned. We are approving strategies for public communication, and we're trying to work as much as we can with our means in order to clarify all the messages, in particular regarding NATO and Georgia partnership.
Thank you so much. Just a small comment regarding the media's role in terms of the combating disinformation. Yes, Georgian media is doing a lot, but on the other hand, there are many Georgian language platforms already which are contributing to the Russian agenda. Previously, it was only the Russian language, Russian channels. Now it already became the available only Georgian language as well.
It is part of my conversations at the very high level with your officials. It's something that we follow very closely. It's something whenever we see that Russian interference is important and is affecting the society of a value partner, we try to counter that, and we do that with the help of your government and with the help of free media, as I said.
Thank you. And let's get back to the next question regarding China and Russia, but in terms of the trade and economical ties, because Russia and China are both very important trade partners for Georgia. And of course, economical dependence is at the same time very big challenge for us. We had the very obvious examples how Russia can manipulate with its market. So how do you think, is there any space or possibilities to extend trade and economic relationship with NATO member countries to strengthen economic cooperation before Georgia will become the member of the NATO? Is there any space we are not still using in terms of economical possibilities?
Well, it's one of our basic principles that we respect foreign policy choices. And not only in terms of the security alliances that every country wants to join, but also in terms of the economic alliances and bilateral relations that you want to have. I think it's important to distinguish here between Russia and China. Russia is a country that is not only the aggressor in a war, but is subject to many sanctions. So for us, with regards to Russia, it is very important to avoid that any country could be a loophole to sanctions and help to circumvent some sanctions. That is a big concern for us. On China, it's completely different. China is a commercial partner for many of us at the end, but we just need to recognize that it's making investment in critical infrastructure in sectors that could affect your ability at the end to protect yourself and to be sovereign in the moment you need to protect yourselves. So you just need to be conscious on that. On how you could increase your trade and economic relations with countries from NATO or the European Union, I think you're doing pretty good. GDP in Georgia, I think, has increased last year more than 11%. I know the rate inflation is quite important, as it is in many European countries. You already have quite a large number of partners within the allies. So I think diversity in terms, I'm a diplomat, but we all know that that diversity in foreign trade, it's very important. But as I said, we need to distinguish very clearly between the relationship that you might have with China, which is just a choice, and the relationship that you have with Russia, which is something that is a concern because it's a country that is subject to sanctions, is an aggressor, and it's clearly a country that is violating blatantly international law.
Thank you. And the last question, because we are running out of the time, I will try to keep it very short. The last question. How would you evaluate Georgia's military defense standard, both human resources and technical, especially air defense? How compatible is it with the NATO standards?
Yeah, thank you very much. I already touched upon a few things. Well, I think the level of professionalism of your armed forces is actually quite high, and that is why we decided to have an exercise organized with Georgia every 3 years. We have decided to increase that frequency as a recognition of the level of efficiency of your armed forces. At the same time, the NATO Georgia Joint Training and Evaluation Center shows that we are able to cooperate together, and it helps in, as I said before, transitioning from Soviet-era equipment to modern NATO standard equipment. So we have recognized the many contributions that your armed forces have given to our own operations. The most easy example was in Afghanistan, where you had more than 800 soldiers deployed there. You were the single partner with more forces and much more than many allies, actually, which was a recognition of the effort. But also, as I always say, whenever you are able to bring 800 people, is because those 800 people and the rotations that come before and after during many years are set to the standards of NATO in every single aspect: interoperability, efficiency, professionalism. So it is actually quite impressive, the level of the work we've been carrying on together, the cooperation we have, the practical and the military level, and at the end, as I said, the efficiency of your own forces. I could mention, of course, some other areas where we are working on, like cyber defense, logistics, and indeed, as you said, air defense. And all of them are already being supported by the substantial NATO-Georgia package, which is basically our vehicle to support Georgia's armed forces in all these domains. But overall, if I have to say something, I said before, I don't want to be misinterpreted or misused. I believe that many things that Georgia is doing are excellent. I believe that our partnership in many domains is excellent, and one of them, of course, is in the cooperation we have with your armed forces and the assessment we do from the professionalism of your armed forces. So we are very pleased with that.